It is really hard to describe how excited I have been for Godzilla Minus One. In most of his more recent adaptations, especially in the MonsterVerse, Godzilla has become a giant boxer punching other monsters for dominance in front of American audiences. Now, there's nothing wrong with that. One of the great things about Godzilla is that he can basically work as almost anything. But I've always preferred exploring the darker side of him and the death and destruction he causes. After all, that's what the original film was about, and I feel that that is what works best for his character. Sadly, however, there is a big shortage of Dark Godzilla films. In fact, the only films that first come to mind when discussing Dark Godzilla films are the original and Shin Godzilla. Oh, and the anime trilogy, but we don't talk about the anime trilogy. Anyways, point being, it's not that hard to see why I was excited for a Minus One, since it promised a way darker take on Godzilla than we had been getting in the past few years. So as soon as the opportunity sprang up, I went to go see the film in theaters, and trust me when I say that it did not disappoint, because I consider Minus One to be the greatest Godzilla film in decades, and possibly one of the best Godzilla films of all time. So for today's review, I will be recapping the plot of the film based solely on my memory and the Wikipedia description of the plot, and explaining along the way why I think so highly of this film. So, without further ado, here are my thoughts on Godzilla Minus One. Also, major spoilers, so yeah. The film begins with a Japanese kamikaze pilot named Shikishima touching down at a plane repair base on a little spot of land named Odo Island in the final days of World War II. Now, real quick before we continue here, I think that naming the island Odo Island is a very clever way of referencing the original 1954 film and foreshadowing what's about to happen next. For those who don't know, in the original movie, Godzilla first appears on a small island also named Odo Island. So naming this island such gives the die-hard Godzilla fans a pretty good idea and clever hint as to what's about to happen next. Anyways, back to the recap. Shikishima turns his plane over to the head mechanic, Tachibana, in order to get it fixed. However, Tachibana is unable to find anything wrong with the plane, and accuses Shikishima of abandoning his duties as a kamikaze pilot. Regardless though, Shikishima is allowed to stay for the night, a choice, however, that he will come to regret for the rest of his life. That very night, an air raid siren rings across the island. The men scurry around, confused, preparing for battle. Many deep-sea fish lay dead on the surface of the ocean. One of the men on a watchtower turns a spotlight towards the ocean, revealing a flailing dinosaur-like creature roaring as it barrels onto the shore. It stomps through the men, squishing them between its massive jaws and throwing them like ragdolls. We learn from some of the mechanics that this is Godzilla, a beast from Odo Island fables, which is known to drive deep-sea fish up to the surface and wreak havoc. Now, I want to mention three things here. 1. I went to see this film in a Regal Premium Experience, or RPX theater, which, along with premium seating, focuses on premium sound quality, which means this scene was extremely loud for me in theaters. Godzilla's booming roar once he had the spotlight shine onto him actually made me cover my ears, and this entire scene was almost unbearably loud, which would turn out to be the case throughout the rest of the film. I guess that's what I get for booking a louder movie theater to see an already loud film. 2. Godzilla in the scene is way smaller than usual, probably only a little bigger than the T-Rex from Jurassic Park. So he is way more nimble and scarier in this scene than you might think. As I described, he's flailing and barreling around all over the place in the scene while releasing his bone-shaking roar. It makes you realize how scary a smaller Godzilla could be while also being a cool callback to Godzillasaurus. And the incredible CGI makes it even better. And 3. I love Godzilla's entrance here. It's not slow and epic, it's fast, sudden, chaotic, loud, and horrifying. It truly helps to convey how scary of a monster Godzilla is and the destruction he causes. Anyways, some of the mechanics in Shikishima are able to hide from the beast and pressure Shikishima to sneak to his airplane and fire at Godzilla to kill him. Shikishima reluctantly sneaks to his plane in the chaos and prepares to fire. However, he finds that he can't pull the trigger. He's too scared and overwhelmed. He just watches on from his plane as Godzillasaurus continues to destroy the base, before getting knocked out in all the chaos. That morning, Shigeshima wakes up to find the only survivor is Tachibana. Tachibana ridicules Shigeshima for not firing on the monster. Around a year later in 1946, Shigeshima returns to his home in Tokyo to find that his parents are dead from the Tokyo bombings. As he walks through the ruins of the once great city, a former neighbor ridicules him for not fulfilling his duties as a kamikaze pilot. He stays in the ruins of his old house, attempting to rebuild a somewhat stable life. Then one day he comes across a woman whose parents were also killed in the bombings, who is mothering an orphaned baby. Over the next year or so, he lives with this woman, whose name is Noriko, and helps her raise the child, whose name is Akiko. Shigeshima gets a job as a minesweeper, and meets a few men on the job, including a former naval engineer named Kenji Noda. He is able to make enough money doing this to support Akiko and Noriko, and they end up living a pretty good life compared to some of the others in the same situation. However, Shigeshima is still haunted by that day on Odo Island, and his failure to fire on Godzilla. He has multiple nightmares across his time with Noriko and Akiko about that terrible night. Now, I kind of glossed over this part of the film, because other than the basics I've already talked about, there's really nothing else significant that happens. It's also the part of the film that I like the least. That's not to say that I didn't like it, in fact, I still did. I'm just saying that it's probably the most boring part of the film for me. During this time, Godzilla is exposed to a U.S. nuclear test at Bikini Atoll. In a short and terribly loud sequence, we see Godzilla is mutated and enlarged by the radiation. Over the next little while, it heads for Japan, destroying multiple U.S. warships along the way. The U.S. doesn't offer help to the Japanese, however, due to tensions with the Soviets, so the Japanese are left to their own resources to fight the monster. Shigeshima and his minesweeping crew were tasked with stalling the beast in the Pacific, so a larger warship called the Taco can intercept and kill it. They plan to use the 2 mines they've collected to stall it. As many deep-sea fish begin to appear at the surface, Shigeshima warns his crew that Godzilla is approaching. Only a few seconds later, Godzilla rises out of the ocean, grabbing the boat next to theirs and taking it back under. This was an incredible moment, and a very cool reveal of Godzilla's new, slightly altered design. Shigeshima's crew immediately decide they are not going to deal with this, and begin to sail away at full throttle. Behind them, however, Godzilla rises to the surface again, slowly swimming behind them with an evil, almost kind of grin on his face. This scene is incredibly tense, and it makes it all the more terrifying when you look deeper into it. Godzilla doesn't have to be after these guys, and could probably kill them at any second if he wanted to, but instead he chooses to chase them and elicit fear in their hearts. And this moment is further enhanced by the incredible CGI. I don't think I can praise the CG in this film enough, especially considering the movie's budget was reportedly under $15 million. Now, compare that to films like The Marvels or Ant-Man and the Wasp: Quantumania, which both had a budget of over $200 million, yet were not able to pump out CGI nearly half as good as this. Seriously, Hollywood, where is all that money going? Not into paying your writers and actors, that's for sure. Anyways, Shigeshima and the others struggle to get the first mine ready, but after a few seconds they are able to get it in the water. Eventually, it makes its way into Godzilla's mouth, and they detonate it. This knocks out a significant amount of Godzilla's face. However, in just a few seconds, the flesh regenerates, leaving Godzilla as good as new as he continues to chase them. Now, for me, this was completely unexpected, but it was incredibly cool to see a depiction of a fast-healing Godzilla, similar to the abilities teased in Shin Godzilla that we sadly really never got to see. With little hope in their hearts now, Shigeshima and the others prepare the second mine for detonation. However, they find that the wire is broken once the mine reaches Godzilla's throat, thus rendering it useless. All hope is lost until the Taco arrives just on time and begins attacking Godzilla. He shows some reaction to the guns, but easily destroys the ship by hitting it with a blast of atomic breath from below. Godzilla then turns away from the wreckage and heads for Tokyo, leaving Shigeshima and his friends to tell the tale. The scene was a great way to show off Godzilla's true power and malice. Shigeshima then returns to Tokyo and shares his past experiences with Godzilla with Noriko, and warns her of what will be coming. Only a few days later, Godzilla arrives in Ginza, Tokyo, the place where Noriko works, and wreaks havoc. We get a pretty cool scene where he throws around and bites down on a train in a reference to the original, and I almost fainted when the original Godzilla suite began playing. Overall, we get a few pretty good moments of epic destruction, but what I really want to focus on in the scene is the horror and the death. This sequence does not fail to emphasize the true scale of death and destruction Godzilla is causing, which is exactly what I love seeing in darker Godzilla films. And once again, the CGI makes it all even better. Anyways, Shigeshima meets Noriko in Ginza and attempts to help her survive. Tanks begin firing at Godzilla, but this only makes him more angry, and I cannot describe both how amazing and how broken the following moments made me feel. As Godzilla's dorsal plates begin to glow blue, the center spikes jut out farther from his back. This is probably the most unique atomic breath charge-up scene in the entire franchise, and I absolutely loved it. Then, Godzilla throws his head forward and releases a heat ray so powerful that it causes a nuclear explosion. The shockwave from the explosion destroys the city and takes many of the civilians with it, including Noriko. Godzilla simply stands there in the middle of Ginza, staring at his work. In the wake of destruction, Shigeshima screams and cries up at the monster as black rain from the explosion begins falling. Now, acting has never been a strong point in Godzilla films, and I don't think it's overall perfect in this film either, but this scene might just be one of the most powerful in the entire franchise because of the acting. Godzilla then returns to the ocean without a second glance. Okay, quick intermission here. I didn't realize how long this script was getting. I realized that my description of the plot may have been too detailed for the most part, and I'm too lazy to go back and rewrite it. So expect the recap going forward to be less detailed and more focused on the parts I want to talk about. That's all. Though Godzilla is gone, he is expected to return soon. The Japanese government refuses to help stop any future attacks, so it is up to the citizens of Japan to defend themselves. Kenji Noda, a former engineer who was part of the minesweeping crew, creates a plan to kill Godzilla and amasses a small group of people to contribute to it, including Shigeshima. His plan is actually pretty unique and original. It involves surrounding Godzilla with Freon tanks and activating them, causing the water buoyancy to lower, plunging Godzilla over 1,000 meters down in just a few seconds. They hope the pressure change will kill him, but if not, they plan to activate safety rafts, which will rocket him to the surface and kill him through explosive decompression. Shigeshima volunteers to lure Godzilla into the correct location in a fighter jet, although his true plan is to fly in Godzilla's mouth and detonate explosives, fulfilling his duty as a kamikaze pilot. Shigeshima gets the only other survivor from Odo Island, Tachibana, on board by pissing him off, basically. Shigeshima gets Tachibana to repair an old airplane for the plan, and has him loaded with explosives. During their final meeting before Godzilla arrives, Noda says that he is proud to execute a plan that will cost no lives, unlike the kamikaze pilots during World War II. This creates a good internal conflict for Shigeshima. Does he go through with his intentions and die in the process, or does he trust the plan and maybe fulfill Kenji's dream of executing a plan without sacrifices? When the plane is fully repaired and the plan ready to be executed, Tachibana gives Shigeshima a quick rundown of how to work the plane and how to detonate the bombs. As Tachibana prepares to show Shigeshima one more thing, the camera cuts away so we can't hear or see what Tachibana is going to show him. However, I instantly inferred what this meant. On the day predicted, Godzilla touches down on shore. Shigeshima draws Godzilla into the trap. However, he easily destroys the two destroyers waiting for him, only to be surprised when he finds out that they are decoys. After a few words of encouragement, the men start ships towards Godzilla and begin surrounding him in Freon tanks as music from across the franchise begins to play. As they finish surrounding Godzilla, the music from King Kong vs. Godzilla begins playing. That's not exactly important at all, but it made me smile in theaters. They activate the tank and Godzilla plunges down to 1,500 meters. Then they activate the emergency rafts. However, halfway up, Godzilla breaks free and survives. As reinforcements arrive, they begin tugging on the rope and manage to pull him up the remaining 800 meters. However, they realize in horror that Godzilla has survived. As he begins charging up his atomic breath, the movie goes deathly quiet as we see the horrified faces of the men. Then, at the last minute, Shigeshima flies towards Godzilla's mouth. He deactivates the bomb safety and plunges the jet into Godzilla's mouth. Godzilla simply stands there for a minute with the plane in his mouth before a huge explosion erupts, blowing off his entire head and killing him. As the men celebrate, they look up and see Shigeshima floating down with a parachute, revealing that what Tachibana showed him earlier was an ejector seat that he installed. And in what I think is supposed to be a reference to GMK, Godzilla's body begins releasing beams of atomic breath and slowly incinerates as it sinks into the ocean. As the men return to shore, Shikishima receives a telegram. Upon reading it, he grabs Akiko and rushes to the hospital. He bursts into the hospital room, and we see Noriko is still alive, sitting up in the bed. Shikishima begins crying as he moves over to Noriko and hugs her. Then Noriko asks one question: "Is your war over yet?" Such a perfect final line for this film. Then we cut to deep in the ocean. As Godzilla's classic theme booms, we see a huge chunk of his flesh regenerating, teasing a sequel. So that was my recap and review of Godzilla -1, but here is a synopsis of my overall thoughts. As you can tell, I absolutely love this film because of its darker tone, CGI, acting, storytelling, and because of all the death and destruction. But what did I not like? I didn't really hate anything about this film, but there were a few things that I didn't 100% vibe with that prevented this film from being a perfect 10 out of 10 in my book. As I said earlier, it is a little boring after the first scene on Odo Island up until Godzilla reappears. Also, I was kind of disappointed that this film didn't focus on the nuclear fear aspect of Godzilla that was the focus of the original film. I really feel like we don't get enough of Godzilla movies like that, especially considering that's what the character was originally created for. Instead, the film's theme is mostly based on the sacrifices of war, and whether or not it's really worth it in the end. Which is great, it's just, I kind of miss the atomic fear aspect of Godzilla. But, that's the great thing about Godzilla. He can be pretty much any kind of character that can be used to tell pretty much any kind of story, with any kind of theme. Whether he's a metaphor for the Hiroshima disaster, a goofy monster having goofy battles with other goofy monsters, a giant boxer fighting for dominance, or anything else, in the end, he is still Godzilla. I truly consider -1 to be the best Godzilla film in decades, and one of the best Godzilla films of all time. I'd give this film a 9 out of 10. It's definitely one of my favorite films of the year. Anyways, thanks for watching. Stay tuned for my next planned video, The Great Dyings Part 4.